Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Welcome to our weekly webinar. My name is Tolu Adeosu, and I am your host. I'm also an assistant secretary with Voice of Men 360, and for a living, I am a registered social worker. It is my great pleasure to host this weekly webinar. Thank you, Voice of Men 360, and the team for giving me this opportunity. We hold weekly webinars where we bring experts from different fields and to discuss particular topics. We want to create awareness by sharing valuable information with our community. We believe it'll be useful in some ways. Before I introduce our special guest today, I just want to give you a brief introduction about Voice of Men 360. Voice of Men 360 is a nonprofit organization founded in 2020 and is based in Toronto, Canada. Voice of Men 360 organization was born out of seeing the tremendous need of boys and men in society. So Voice of Men 360 decided to step up and support them in the many areas of their lives. We are part of International Men's Day, which is a global organization, and it is based on 6 pillars, and it has to do with the overall well-being of boys and men. It has been around, International Men's Day has been around for 21 years and is celebrated in 90 countries around the world. So these 90 countries join together to do various activities regularly. So our topic for today is mental health matters. And our special guest is Jazz Kara. Jazz Kara has been volunteering in the mental health space for over 5 years. He's currently a part of CAMH's Millennial Council, raising money for the foundation. In addition, he's a co-facilitator for Soch South Asian Men's Group. So let us welcome Jazz today.
Thank you, Tolu. I
Sorry
appreciate
about that. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your bio? I feel like it was a little bit short. I'm used to reading longer bios.
Yeah, definitely. I like to keep it simple when it comes to bios, right? And just to add to your point, I've been volunteering within the mental health space for over 5 years now, and the predominant reason why I got into it was because I've had friends that suffer from mental health, and as an ally and also as a good friend, what can I do to support them throughout their journey, and personally as well as coping with stress and how to work with it. So I realized there's a need for this, and how do you address that need? And that's where I kind of went face first into this space for the last 5 years now.
Okay, so tell me more about, is your educational background in, does it have to do with nursing, social work, mental health, anything like that? Tell me a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So my educational background is actually in IT. I'm an IT professional. Prior to that, I was an accountant. And the reason why I got into this whole space was that there was a lack of education and awareness, right, for this. And when it comes to men's mental health, if you look at the suicide rates, predominantly the suicides attempted or even conducted are by men itself. And to me, it's a sticking point as to why is this happening. And I don't have an educational background, but I'm an advocate and volunteer, and what's the best way for me to approach this? And so this is where I started doing a little bit of research on my own, but also started volunteering with the organizations, understanding what my friends are going through on a day-to-day basis and how I'm able to support them throughout their journey. So I'm an accountant and techie, but no educational background in the mental health space, but been working quite a bit.
That's fantastic, Jazz.
Thank
It's
you.
good to hear that there's people like you that recognize the need, and you recognize that you wanted to be a better support, better ally for your friends. And so you took the initiative to look into how you can do that, how you can understand mental health better so that the stigma would not be there, and then how to be of support to them and to others. So it's, thank you so much for doing that.
Thank
As a
you.
social worker, mental health is actually a big, one of my biggest favorite thing to actually delve into. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to tell us today. Now, you mentioned friends. Was this friends from your teenage years or friends from when you were even younger? Can you just tell us a bit more about around what age group did you realize that this is really mental health is really taking shape in them?
Yeah, predominantly. So what I found was that the the issue that they went through was um, mainly in their early 20s. And what I found was that predominantly amongst men, if we're able to essentially being able to diagnose this at an earlier age, they'll be able to better cope with school, day-to-day, life activities. And so when I was working with my friends on school projects, for instance, throughout university, I saw that there was a pretty big gap. And what someone has to have passion for instance, of, you know, literally late night studying economics, or, studying for, let's say, a class on accounting, they lost that passion, motivation. And, where was that sudden dip and what happened? And so that's when I found out that they started caving in. And caving in there's nothing wrong with that, but they caved in because they couldn't handle what was bothering them from the past. And so when I realized that, I was like, hey, my friends, I'm gonna use anonymous names here now, Matt and John, they're not what they used to be. If something happened personally, is everything okay at home? And so far from what they told me, everything was fine. But as I took a deeper dive in lens, I was like, this is not them, right? And you begin to feel it as a friend, right? As why is Matt and John not acting the way they used to act? And so once I had a candid conversation, saying, hey, look, I do not know what you're going through right now. Would you be please able to help me understand what's happening right now? Because you're my friend, right? I care about you. And if something's bothering you, then it's bothering me. And so I need to understand. And then from there, they told me that this is what they're going through right now. They said, like, Jazz, I lack motivation. My grades are not what they used to be. I can't put on this face anymore. And it's really bothering me. And so from there, that's where I stood up and said, hey, no more. I'm going to be with you, thick and thin. And, we're going through this process together. And so that's when I begin to recognize that, if even though they said themselves that they had this mental illness, so to speak, during high school, but they didn't know what it was. They kind of brushed it off, but it finally caught up to them where they weren't able to deal with it and handle it. So that's where I stepped in, and as a friend, to make sure that they're doing all right.
Well, thank you for doing that. I think it takes a lot for somebody to recognize, okay, my friends, I know that normally they're more passionate, they're more whatever, but something's going on. And you just stopped and you reflected and you actually addressed that with them one on one. And then you were able to see what you could do to be of further help. So I know that you have a presentation for us today. Is that
Yep, that's correct.
correct?
Yes, yeah.
Right. And I don't want to take away from that. And then I do have lots more questions for you afterwards. So why don't you take it away with your presentation, and then we will talk a bit more after that.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Thank you.
Um, would you be able to allow me to share my presentation?
Yeah, I think Sivam's work, he should be able to give you that permission.
Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Thank you. This one. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
You see like the cursor moving as well?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Great. So, thank you everyone for joining us today. And when I had the opportunity to talk about, why mental health matters, I thought it was a great opportunity for Soch and Voice of Men360 to conduct this in partnership. And Soch is now sponsored by the Canadian Red Cross. So I wanted to know that there's an ecosystem of resources and help available for everyone out there. So quickly on the agenda, today I'm doing a little bit of introduction about Soch. What is mental health versus mental illness? It's important to create that distinction. Some of the stereotypes that we go through, the major challenges, and we broke this down into youth, middle age, and elderly, and what that may mean, and also the impacts on the South Asian community, as I'll talk about introduction about Soch, and what support's available, whether it be in your local community or who can you reach out to. So with that being said, Soch Mental Health, a non-for-profit organization, they were it was established rather by Jasmeet and Maneet. They're two nurse practitioners here in Canada. And the real purpose and point here for SOCH was that they want to take health from a lens to empower the South Asian community and with mental knowledge, but mainly through education, awareness, workshops, and just being able to know that it's okay to not be okay and be able to put that lens on. And they felt that within the South Asian community, and not just others, because they have partnership with other communities as well, is to create that cultural awareness. And what does it mean for you and your household? So, mental health versus mental illness. Now, mental health, mental illness, we have to realize that mental health concerns our emotional and psychological condition. So, what does that mean? That means, for instance, if we're stressed out, we're coping with certain life events, right? How do we help with in terms of ensuring our mental health is okay? It's up to speed. Mental illness, though, refers to disorders. That's where you're actually diagnosed by a psychiatrist or some type of mental health professional, and that impact our overall behavior and our thoughts. So, mental illness, we have to understand is that it does not discriminate. It can impact anyone, regardless of race, age, gender, ethnicity. It does not discriminate at all. And a good mental health really ensures that we can handle any kind of stress or challenge situations with a clear mind. So I wanted to create that distinction there. And the quote here, it's predominant in the sense that 1 in 5 do experience mental illness, right? And this is increasing. And 5 in 5 have mental health. So you can't say I don't have any mental health. Like, no, you do have mental health, because everyone goes through something, which would be stress or happiness, right? That's great mental health. But mental illness is when you've actually been diagnosed. So I just wanted to create that distinction there. Now, when it comes to mental illness, and this is from Kids Matter from Australia 2012, is that there's mainly different causes. And the different causes here is that mental health is an ecosystem that has the biological, social, and psychological, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And with these causes, your mental health is infected. It's affected by family relationships, our self-esteem, our social skills, school, our peers, and even our biological as well. It could be, some genetic vulnerabilities, some drug effects, our physical health as well. And it's want to create the idea that the cause of mental health can be from any of these specific areas. So, it could be some social, it could be some biological, everything is infected. So you have to understand that from a mental health perspective, you really have to take care of your mind and put yourself as a priority in terms of creating that awareness and ensuring that self-care is really important. So, mental health is not something that happens out of nowhere. These are the areas that affect mental health. Now, what are some of the warning signs? Now, the warning signs that we see generally in mental health, it varies. And the warning signs are based upon things such as our change in eating, our sleeping, changes in our mood. We start seeing, high levels of anxiety, fear, or even anger sometimes. Some of the warning signs that we begin to isolate. Discussing with some of my friends is that they did not want to hang out with anyone. They wanted to self-isolate and ensure that what they went through, they don't pass it on to others. And they felt more comfortable in that way. The other challenges I mentioned was the day-to-day activities, right? We're unable to handle them, right? What seemed so simple, such as brushing our teeth or even getting out of bed, it became harder and harder to do because it didn't feel right, so to speak. And the image here of a dog shadowing, of a man, for instance, really dictates that, right? It could be a man, woman, child, anyone, but we have like this cloud head, this gray cloud over us, and it's over our head following whatever we do. But what tends to happen is that some other warning signs that we may see is could be stemming from physical problems. We start coping with drugs or alcohol as we don't know any other healthier methods, which I'll discuss a little bit later on. And then we also begin to defy authority. We realize that, we're gonna stick it to the man, so to speak, and, not take orders from anyone. Now, I discussed a little bit of a brief overview of mental health and some of the differences between mental health and mental illness. What are some of the causes and some of the warning signs that may pop up? And as you may be able to see from whether it be your friends or family members. But now I'm going to go into some of the stereotypes and some of the stigma around mental health. So some of the common stereotypes, right? I really like this image over here because it talks about what we think mental health happens in certain countries, for instance, and what it means. And we got it mapped, right? So, some of the typical stereotypes is that, where someone with mental health is dangerous and unpredictable. But the serious thing here is that most people with mental illness never commits acts of violence, right? It's about, I believe, 97% or so. There's 3% that may or may not, but that's a different type of disorder. We also find that people with mental illness are incompetent. That's not true at all. Some of the names mentioned here, you have Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, some very famous individuals have suffered from mental health as well, but they became so successful. And the reason being is because they're able to use that as a blessing, as a gift, and to their advantage. So your weaknesses become your strength. What I also find in the stereotype is that, they deserve blame for their conditions. That's not true, right? As I mentioned, going back to that chart is that it could be a biological, social, or even a physical area that could impact you as well, right? And so trauma that's from childhood could be tended to blame. So we can't blame the individual itself for that. And also that, there's little hope for recovery. Someone has mental illness have for the rest of their life. That's not true. As is mentioned here, is that with being able to receive treatment, being able to diagnose the problem, most people tend to live a healthy life. They tend to live a life that's full of abundance and love. And so there is nothing beyond that. Any questions so far, or?
I don't believe we have any from the audience, but you're preaching to the choir right now. So I personally don't have any questions. I totally I agree with everything you're saying. And this is also part of my background. So yeah, you can keep going ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And to the audience out there, I like to keep it interactive as possible, mm-hmm. Right? So and the other thing I wanted to mention was that, and I'll touch base a little bit on, especially in the youth section for major challenges, is being able to diagnose this early. And what does that mean? So that's one of the stereotypes as well, a little hope for recovery. There's tons of hope for recovery. Mm-hmm. And
wait, actually, Jazz, I was looking at your presentation before today. Can you I really found the stigma map that you have. Can you please actually go over that? I think it'd be interesting for our audience to hear some of the stigmas that are all over the world when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, please definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I can definitely do that. So, when it comes to mental health is that a lot of it is boiled down to, let's say, cultural barriers, right? And it boils down to the culture itself. And one thing we have to say is that, it says on the picture itself is that it's time to change, right? And, in the United Kingdom, for instance, right, one of the things here is that people with mental health were prevented from carrying out jury service or becoming a company director. And to me, that was just appalling when I read that. How can someone with mental health, you put the stigma that they can't conduct day-to-day activities. They can't be able to perform, excel at a job. There's a lot of individuals that I met personally that are lawyers, doctors that did have mental health, that did go through depression, right? And, going back to what I mentioned before is that mental illness does not have any discrimination. It affects, any age, gender, race, ethnicity, etc. And it's crazy because the time for change has to happen. One of the ones that appalled me was what happened in Asia, right? About the major airlines. They refuse passengers that have a mental health condition, um, unless they're accompanied by whether it be a psychiatrist
Psychiatrist.
or
Yeah.
any type of mental health professional. To me, that's just appalling. What if it's a little kid that has been diagnosed with ADHD, for instance, right? Isn't a parent suffice? Because the parents understand the kid on a day-to-day basis. If you think about it, that's their child, that's their baby. They grew up with them. It's a daily interaction. Where a psychiatrist, it could be on a weekly basis, etc. It's, to me, some of these rules are appalling, and it's just that this example here just demonstrates that it's time for a change, right? It's time to break down those barriers, break down that stigma, and push through, um, being able to, push the envelope further. And, if you think about it, the law in England was passed in 2013, right? That's what, about 7 years ago now, 8 years ago now. That's just crazy that it took until 2013 to make that change. And to me, it's sad. But the point is that we're progressing forward, right? And we're progressing forward to make that change. And that's the positive impact, is that now with social media and platforms such as this, being advocating for this, saying, no, you live a daily normal life.
Mhm.
Awesome. Is that all right?
Yeah, no, great. Thank
Great.
you.
One of the things that you can do as an individual is look at your overall attitude and action. And I apologize for the graphic there. I'll try to send a better one after. But
Mhm.
focus on STOP. And this came from the Canadian Mental Health Association, CMHA. And one thing is, as for stereotype, right? Stereotype people with mental health conditions. You have to really recognize that, okay, am I stereotyping someone that if this person has mental health, will I catch it, for instance? The second thing you have to look at is the T. Being able to trivialize with people with mental health conditions, or is it a condition itself? So you have to really ask yourself the question that, what am I doing? Am I kind of putting this person on this pedestal here? How do I avoid that? And also, is that, am I offending people with mental health conditions by saying this, by acting out like this? And lastly is P, which is the patronize. Patronize people with mental health conditions, right? By treating them differently, or ensuring that they're not as good, so to speak. And so when you're able to use STOP to break down the stigma behind mental health, ask yourself these questions, right? Ask yourself, is that, would I want to be treated this way, right? Just because of a condition? Am I contributing to this? So you want to change your perspective and your lens when it comes to mental health. So hopefully STOP is able to allow you to speak up against the stigma and break down these barriers. So now we're going to focus on the major challenges. And the major challenges, we broke this down into youth, the middle-aged/adults, and lastly, the elderly. And the reason being is because we wanted to be able to cater to the masses, of whether it be your child, your niece or nephew, your brother or sister, or even your elderly parents. And what does that mean? So that's why we broke down this way, so you have an overall idea as to what they may be going through. Okay, so for the youth, so what are the signs, right, for youth with mental health? And it's important to discuss, for instance, some of the stats here that I didn't put up here right now. Approximately 1 in 5 youth have a mental health challenge. So that you can say that figure right there, that stat is very appalling. 1 in 5, that's huge. 70% of mental health challenges have their onset in the youth or childhood. So what we found is that 70% of mental health for children, for people who are the adults, it goes back to them being a child, right? And then lastly, that it's critical to have early identification. And I mentioned about John and Matt, they were dealing with this since high school. If we're able to, pinpoint this from when they're dealing with, grade 11, grade 12, then we'll have the ability to essentially address it then and there and have better coping skills. But if you didn't know that, what are some of the signs? Well, I talked about isolation, and that's where in the youth we find that they begin to avoid family and friends. There's a change in sleeping habits, the way they eat. Sometimes, they act out rebellious, right? And in a child now, there's consistent worrying, there's mood swings, that their behavior changes, or their mood changes from happiness to sadness to anxiety. And also there's a lack of energy and motivation, right? And you can see that whether it be from the youth, but also from an adult perspective. And some of the characteristic behaviors that you should be aware of is that some of these signs are very intense, right? They persist over a long period of time. And from what you see here is that it's inappropriate for that child at that age, right? So, for instance, I'm no child expert here, but if you realize at the age of 9, right, a child should be, let's say, happy, curious, go lucky, playing outside. But then again, they're sad and they're constantly worrying that if they go outside, something may happen, or you find that they don't want to play with their friends anymore, even though they're playing, a couple months ago. That could be signs of worrying, and you really want to be able to address that and have that conversation. But then again, what we found, and just some of the research that I did myself, is that what are some of the common mental health disorders, right? From what I've seen online, and this is from Ontario CMHA, is that there's some anxiety, there's depression or other mood disorders, there's sometimes eating disorders as well. They don't feel like eating. And as a parent, what can you do? And Tola, maybe you can speak to this a little bit as well, is that, knowing down the behaviors that concern you, right? You want to be able to be their friend, be an ally, listen to their response. And similarly, what I did with John and Matt is to let them know that you'll get through this together, right? We'll take it one step at a time, and that we'll work out through the difficulties that he or she may be facing. And lastly, to seek help, right? And I'll talk about getting help a little bit later on down the presentation, but it's just one of the avenues. So maybe you can speak to this a little bit if you don't mind.
You know what? Those are completely what I've seen parents do. I do a lot of counseling with young people. As young as 5 I've done. And so
Wow.
it's when the parents have recognized that, okay, that my child is too anxious, or they're saying things like, I want to harm myself, or they're being bullied at school and they've noticed that they've withdrawn. And so and then like you said, they do try to listen to their child, and that's why they come and seek help from someone like me. And then I also say normalizing some of the fears that the children may have. So for example, with COVID going on and stuff right now, just letting them know that, hey, I'm afraid too, or everybody's afraid right now. And just so that and then we are all worried. So that way they know that it's just them that's feeling this way, that adults can feel that way and others are also feeling that way too.
Exactly. We're all in this together, right? So I love that approach. That's amazing. So now we're going to talk about adults and what's happening, right, with adults. So with adults is that there's the reason why I put this as a trail is because there is a lack of support and funding and acknowledgement, right? That's going on throughout the community. A lot of it has to do with awareness. And we find that, there is a shortage of resource access, but simply put, there's a lot of resources available out there. And I'll discuss a little bit beyond that. And with adults, what we fail to do sometimes is that to receive that timely and effective treatment, if we have the ability to receive treatment right away and on a timely basis, this prolonged mental health or mental illness that we're coping with right now won't be for such a long period of time. We'll be able to deal with it, address it, and be able to do it in a healthy manner. And then lastly is the prevention of mental illness, because as I mentioned, is that a lot of mental illness can be traced back to childhood. So how do we prevent that moving forward? Because for instance, we have discussions amongst our peers, for it, and such as workshops, and sometimes the men there are sharing their experience that I don't want this passed on to my child, because whatever I went through my childhood, I want to give it to my kids. So how do I prevent it? And it's about receiving that timely, effective treatment. For adults, what I wanted to add here was that what are some of the disorders that happen, right? And I really love this image because, we tend to wear our name tag, so to speak, what we're going through, over our chest, but we don't say it though. So for instance, hello, I'm anxiety, I'm stress, I'm panic, I'm PTSD. And from adults, what we've seen is that some disorders that they go through is schizophrenia, OCD, anxiety disorders, substance abuse, because we don't know how to essentially handle our stress. And so the lack of acknowledgement prevents us from doing so. And lastly, our mood disorders as well is something that adds up to it. And going back to what I mentioned previously, was that they want to pass it on to your child. If I'm angry, I don't want to pass it on to my loved ones around me. I would like to handle it and take it head on, and be able to create that separation in space. And so, same things as as a friend, as a peer, being able to note down these behaviors. As an adult, we tend to become a little more stubborn, so to speak. And what we're able to do, as whether it be an ally or a friend, is to really talk to our peers. Say, hey, it's okay, to not feel great sometimes. Like, it's okay that um, to really own up to what you're going through, because when you are feeling great, everything around you is great, right? We want to create that on a day-to-day basis. It's not to be 100% all the time, but we want to create that on a day-to-day basis. So as a friend, you want to encourage them to seek out help, go with them to their appointments, potentially handhold them along the process as well, because if we do not stand up for others and lead by example, then others will not follow. And that's one of the difficulties when it comes to for an adult. Any questions with that, or
No.
so far? Excellent. So with that being said, I really want to focus on the elderly now, and what does it mean, whether it be for our parents or even our grandparents. The World Health Organization put out a scary stat, and that 15% of the elderly population, so 60 and greater, have some type of mental health, right? Have some type of mental health issue. And elderly, they're more likely to report physical versus psychological issues when they go see a family doctor. To me, that's really scary, but that's what they're used to, though, right? Seeing a GP, a general practitioner, and the family doctor is more like to report a physical and psychological issue, because for them, that's the main area of focus, right? And that's what we think. As we get older, our body begins to break down. We get to have back pain or shoulder pain. And we have to start changing that conversation. And one thing I like about this image here is that, mental health comes in multiple faces, right? And it has a different, you can say, connotation attached to it. So happiness, we have it with, sunshine, right? Rainbows and everything. But with anger, we think about stormy clouds. Sleep disorder, it's basically confusion, if you think about it. Paranoia is like our third eye, just always wondering what's going to happen, this is going to happen. And so these are some of the things that happen within the elderly community. And the illnesses that we've seen here is that 3.8% of the population, has anxiety, right? Depression affects over 5% of elderly out there as well. So these are the two main illnesses that we've seen. And that, going back to this image over here, is that there's a lot out there, right? And it's just a matter of having that conversation with our grandparents, or our parents, or even your peers as well, right? To say that, look, if you go to the doctor and you feel like something's wrong here internally, not from a physical standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint, let's go discuss that, right? Being able to note down those behaviors, being able to note down that erratic behavior, for instance. So some of the symptoms that we see across elderly, and this is that's based upon my research, is that the feeling of helplessness, the feeling of not being worthy. Um, what we all see, it's a part of dementia, is memory loss, right? Especially when it comes to short-term memory. In addition to that, we start seeing, from the isolation standpoint, social withdrawal. What we used to do is, when I think of elderly, I think of, people going to the park playing chess, right, or some type of games, or going to the park and playing cards with their friends, or just going for nice, lovely walks. They stopped begin to do that. And another key aspect that I found really interesting with my research was that with elderly is that they have trouble handling finances, because as you get older, you're not earning the same income as you used to, right? Or you may have gone through retirement. And so that's when you start having the trouble of finance in the back of your head. And that's another issue as well, another symptom as well. And lastly, unexplained fatigue, right, or energy loss. Now we see that with elderly. Oh, as you get older, you become more tired. That's not true to say the least. It's because sometimes it's unexplained. It happens out of nowhere, right? Someone who's, let's say, 65 and above, they're still active, still going out, but at the age of 60, 67, they begin to start having unexplained fatigue, even though they're still, they used to work out on a day-to-day basis, but they have no illness, so to speak. It could be a mental illness, so you want to be aware of that. So we talked about the major challenges that's facing the youth, adults, and the elderly. Now, from a social perspective, I want to talk about the impact in the South Asian community, especially for younger adults as well. So, Tolu, you may be able to, be able to discuss about this, but it's toxic masculinity, and it's been here for centuries and centuries. And so, the top these traits of toxic masculinity is that we believe is to not talk about emotion, right? To suppress our emotions, right? Not talk about our feelings, because that's not a manly thing to do. The second point here, and which I love this image, is like a football helmet, right? It's very tough. It's a strong exterior. You want to maintain that appearance of hardness, that you're a very strong individual. And lastly is, if you have to resort to this, sadly, is using violence as an indication of power. And one thing I love here, the sign being held by a gentleman, is that you can be masculine without being toxic, bro, right? Because it literally is truth to power, is that you're able to be still a dominant male, or a masculine male, so to speak, a manly man, where you have the ability to talk about your emotions, saying, hey, you know what, today's not a good day for me. And it's okay, you don't have to have that intimidation anymore, because you can resolve a lot of things of just being yourself, right? Is there anything you want to add to that from a toxic masculinity standpoint?
It's funny because last week's webinar was on the new alpha male. So it was exactly about this, where the new alpha male is someone that's in tune with his emotions, with his spiritual, and everything. And then that's what makes you masculine, right? Not that you have to be, like you said, you suppress your emotions and you really have to be tough and hard. But no,
Right.
you can have all of these. You can be in tune with your emotions, be in tune with your spiritual side, be in tune with your a bit more of a feminine side, and you can still be seen as a manly man. And so it's interesting that you're touching on this today, because that was the topic we had last week.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, it's funny because I led a webinar on modern masculinity. What does that mean? And so to build upon your point, is that when we think of toxic masculinity, or think about macho man, for instance, right? And that you're right, is that the new day and age of what it means to be a man has totally changed, right? And it's okay to, like you said, to be more in touch with your emotional side, and be able to understand that it's okay, man. Like, you can just talk about your emotions and just be you, right? Where your emotions on your sleeve, so to speak. So that's funny.
Thank you.
So some of the traits that we see here is that of masculinity, and it stems from what we're surrounded with. One is the fact that there's a lack of elder male role models that we see. One thing that we've seen here is that our families tend to compare amongst ourselves, saying, "Oh, your cousin is doing a lot better than you are. Look at his grades. Look at her grades, for instance, right?" Be someone such as that. In the social media realm, there's a lack of representation we see. We're predominantly influenced by Western influences, and we forget about some of the influence that we have from back home. Also, as you mentioned too, as well, is that we're always taught to man up or become the alpha male, and that's where we kind of brush aside these emotions or brush aside what we're dealing with and being taught to get over it. It's not great because the real power and strength comes from being vulnerable, right? Being able to put yourself out there and have that confidence, that using that vulnerability as a sign of strength. And from also what we've seen as well is that we're not happy to see others succeed. When you're being compared to your cousin, I was like, I'm gonna beat my cousin. But then when your cousin starts doing well, you begin to realize that I don't see my cousin do that well, right? And that indicates jealousy and animosity as well. So what I wanted to quickly cover was getting help, and getting help is really important. And maybe Tolu, you can add to as we go along as well. Is that from what I've seen from 2011 to now is that, and I speak from a Canada perspective and what's available. There's a lot of resources out there, but it's just a matter of understanding how to access them, right? It's just a matter of understanding what's available. And even if you do a quick, simple Google search, there's a lot available within your community and area, but just a matter of understanding, how do I get this? Is this right for me? And more importantly is to take that step forward to being able to accept the help out there. So getting help, and I put this in a circular diagram because it's all connected into one, right? First step is seeing a family doctor or a general practitioner that you've seen for X amount of years. The reason being is you've developed trust and rapport with them, right? Being able to, hopefully have that comfortable conversation. The second thing is that there's a lot of within the community mental health agencies out there, mental health agencies that are able to provide the resources, being able to help you with some potentially coping skills that's available. You can go to the hospital. That's more for more serious cases, such as if someone attempted suicide, for instance, or go see a counselor, whether it be at school, in your university or college, or something that's local as well, or reaching out to loved ones is a great way, because sometimes, I do not want to go see that doctor right now because seeing that doctor it's intimidating, frankly. But I can speak with my best friend, or I can speak with my cousin about this, right? Being able to have that channel of communication open. And lastly, self-help, right? That's one of the best things you can do. Doing things that you love doing. That could be things such as meditation, sketching, going out for a walk, working out, playing sports. Things like that is great for your mental health. And these are just one of the many avenues of getting help. Is there anything you can add to this, or
I think you pretty much got it covered. And I hope people understand it's not that it has to go from family doctor to the community mental health agency and so
yes,
on. It can be either or, but just as long as you recognize that, or somebody around you recognizes that, hey, you're not doing so well, and then you tap into all of these resources, any one of these resources are available.
exactly. Thank you. Yes, and yes, I realize that the images do that, but yeah, you don't have to take a step-by-step process. You can reach out to anyone. Exactly.
Mhm.
Now, the pandemic has really, really did a number on some of us, and even for myself. I mean, I'm working from home, and it adds up. So, what can you do? Simple things such as giving yourself a pep talk. There's a great video by Amy Cuddy, and she's a researcher with, I believe, Harvard University. Don't quote me on that, but she talks about doing the power pose, right? For standing in the mirror for 2 minutes and posing like you're a superhero. That provides a lot of confidence and a lot of energy and excitement as well. So that's one thing you can take a look at. So giving yourself a pep talk to the mirror. Some people like, taking a shower, but for them, that could be one coping method. One thing that's grown a lot is meditation and exercising as well. So these are some of the ways to deal from an emotional standpoint. From a problem focus is being able to note down what some of the behaviors are, being able to write down what time is it happening. So is it happening during work hours? Is it happening, after work? Is it something you're working with? And then also being able to have that helping hand, right? Reach out to professionals such as Tolu, for instance, right, in your area, in your local community, because it's very important to do so. And just doing activities that are really focused on developing a strong foundation to be able to being able to deal with these problems. As I mentioned, COVID-19, there's a lot that's going on here, but some of us are in lockdown, some of us are out of the lockdown. There's a few things I want to touch point here is that nutrition is really important, right? You are what you eat. You probably heard of that saying. So being able to eat healthy foods, being able to get your sleep, your movement in, so going for your walks, gyms may be closed, start a maybe workout routine at home, do renovations at home if you can, right? Something that requires some type of movement going around. Also, being able to connect with loved ones. It's hard when you're not able to see everyone, right? So it's great for you to actually go and set up maybe like a weekly video call with your friends, having those type of conversation, or do some type of virtual activity is really helpful as well. We also found is that power in routines. So if you're able to have a strong routine, be able to change it up, that could also help you out as well. And lastly is limit your exposure to news and social media out there. That's just another way that hits our brain. So to kind of avoid that and focus on the creative side is really grateful. And lastly, if you want any contact information, reach out to Soch. There's a lot of information. You can visit our websites, email us, other social media as well. But it's just an example here that I put this up is because there's a lot of help available out there and for a lot of agencies, and they're available on Instagram, maybe YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. So there's more than one way to reach out, and the channel of communication has opened quite a lot. And that's it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jazz. Thank you. That was very informative. I do believe that you guys are doing good work, and I noticed that you guys mostly focus on South Asians, correct? Or is it that's correct, right?
Yes, we mainly
yeah.
focus on South Asians, but we do have partnership with other communities as well, and then focusing on fostering future events for that. So,
okay. So, do you tend to find that you work with a lot of newcomers?
yeah, so I tend to find that we do have some newcomers that do join the workshops or some of our live Instagram events as well, that are just more curious, or more importantly, people just need a place to talk about what they're going through. And so what we find is that we have newcomers that come and then they disappear for a while, then they come back. And we also have individuals that are consistent and they're coming out to every event virtually.
So do you find that one of the mental health issues or challenges that you're finding is that newcomers are dealing with culture shock from being in Canada and being different from India or Sri Lanka? Or are you finding that to be a problem that they're facing?
Yes, because what we find is that some people are torn between Western ideals and back home ideals from the I call it the South Asian philosophy or the Eastern philosophy, because what they find is that, when they're exposed to social media, using our phones, for instance, they feel like they have to live this certain lifestyle or being able to live up to certain cultural ideal that's out west. But at home, it's a different story, right? It's a different story that they have trouble understanding. Like, wow, I thought this is how the West was, or I thought this is how it is in Canada or USA, for instance. But it's not like that as well. So what they find is that it's a difficulty because when they go seek out help from a cultural perspective, the counselor, he or she may not understand what's happening back home because of a different cultural background. So it is definitely a big culture shock for them, and it takes time for them to transition and adjust. So we find that being some of the problems, and when they're able to connect with us on a peer-to-peer basis, it speaks volumes as well.
Okay, so yeah, you guys are providing culturally sensitive services for people that are trying to figure out and balance the world that they're coming from and the world that they're in right now.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Now tell me, because I was an immigrant like back in
Mhm.
the 1990s. Um, and so, I was quite young when we came to Canada, but do you find that when you work with, I'm guessing you guys have some elderly people you work with as well, correct?
So that channel is opening up now, and
Okay.
we're doing things such as actually a cool story is that working with the elderly has been tough, right? Because what we find is that with the elder people who are older than us, I'd say baby boomers, and if my dad sees this video, he's gonna get upset with this, but with like baby boomers, for instance, is that mental health is not talked about. It's not a conversation that we have on a day-to-day basis. It's not a norm,
Mhm.
for instance, right? And it's going back to that masculine macho man type of facade, is that you don't talk about it. You're a man, you get over it, for instance, right? So the what we've done for the elderly is that you're doing yoga in your chair, for instance, right? So
Okay.
being able to connect like that. So what we're doing with the elderly is being able to bridge that gap, and we're figuring out certain things to do to get them intertwined into mental health slowly but surely. And we found successes with things such as yoga. We've had a participant bring her dad on, and she was speaking for her father, actually, because her father was
Mhm.
timid and shy to talk about it. But the message we got after was that thank you, because this conversation needs to be held. This conversation needs to be talked about. So what we're finding is that engaging the elderly, we're working on that piece, and we're doing it through different channels, whether it be through family or through things such as yoga in your chair, which I thought was really unique. So
So the challenges you see with the elderly in terms of like cultural shock and the challenges with you see with like the youth are different, correct?
100%, it's like day and night. Yeah.
Okay. So can you speak a little bit more about the challenges you see with the youth when it comes to cultural shock and just the mental health impacts?
Yeah, definitely. With the youth, we find that they're a little bit confused, right? They're a little bit confused as to, I should be living this lifestyle that I see that's happening out west, but then they tend to be a little bit ashamed of what's happening back home, right? Bringing it back home is like happening at their house, for instance, because
Mhm.
that's where they're supposed to be living a different lifestyle, where they should be, for instance, eating a certain type of food, speaking a certain language. But outside of the home, they don't have to do that, right? They can speak English predominantly. They have the ability to hang out with friends, do whatever they want. But at home, it's a whole shift. And so what we find with that culture shock is that they don't know who to be, and they start putting up this mask that outside I'm like this, but at home I'm like this. And so we
Mhm.
found the cultural shock is that finding that medium happy ground, because they're saying, should I be proud of my culture when it's potentially being made fun of, or should I be
Mhm.
more strong about it, saying, no, this is who I am. And it's tough because their parents want them to be one way, but then their friends are a different way. So what we find from the culture shock aspect is that they think that they're alone, but they're not alone out there, right? And it's like, no, this is a common scenario that a lot of us go through. And so having the ability to have that candid conversation. Some of us are older, so we've been through the ropes, so to speak, and we can talk them through
Mhm.
the experience. And just having being the ability to be a sounding board is very, very effective, because it provides clarity within the mind, and it
Mhm.
allows them to go and be themselves authentically and strongly as well. Strongly as well,
Mhm.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so trying not to live like having to be two different people because that can be exhausting and mentally I could see how that would affect someone. Now,
Right.
I know that you've been doing this for like about the last 5 years, but do you feel like there's a change in how the youth and even like adults, parents, and like the more seniors are accepting or becoming like when it comes to the culture, like are they having a harder time now or do you think they're having an easier time than like 10 to 15 years ago?
So that's a great question. And what we find is that, and I can speak from my experience
Mhm.
personally, is that 10 to 15 years ago, I would not be on this platform right now talking about it, right?
Right.
Fast forward 10, 15 years later, I'm on this platform, I'm able to talk about it. So the barriers to entry has drastically increased, though it is still tough to talk about. And the reason being is the cultural aspect, because it's something that we don't talk about in the South Asian culture, right? It's something that's swept under the rug. And not just, South Asian culture, but I'd say the Eastern culture as well, because there's a stigma. If I hang out with you, I'll get that mental illness, for instance, right?
Mm.
Or, it's like a taboo subject, for instance. So, but now what we find is that slowly things are easing up. The youth are the one that's leading the charge. They are the ones that are saying no. They're taking a stand, saying that enough is enough, and we're gonna speak about this. And what we find is that it goes to what I mentioned earlier, is leading by example, right? Once they begin to lead, um, others tend to follow, and they see that example. Wow, I see my child going to something. Let's start having that candid conversation, and slowly but surely, the ice begins to melt, and things start to open up a lot more. With the elderly, things are slowly shifting. Is it at the rate we want to change? No, though. I'm really happy that things are beginning to open up. It's better than when it was 10 to 15 years ago. Hopefully that answers your question, but it's a tough one. It's a tough nut to crack.
Mhm. No, no, that's important. And I think it's the same with, like I'm Nigerian and,
Mhm.
culturally, like speaking up and opening up about these things. And I'm noticing, like in my practice, I'm getting more people that are Black from Africa or from South Asia. And so,
Right.
and there's a difference. I've seen that in the last even 5 years from my
Uh-huh.
private practice. I
Right.
didn't used to get a lot of Blacks or South
Right.
Asians, and now I'm getting more. So I do believe there is a shift happening, and that we are waking up and we're recognizing that, hey, I'm struggling and I don't have to, keep it a secret, or because I've tried to reconcile my culture and the culture that the Canadian culture, and I'm trying
Mhm.
it. That's a struggle, like because I don't know who to be. I don't know who I am, right? And
Right.
so, and I think that the message, it sounds like you guys are trying to pass, is that you can be just you. You can be your culture that you grew up in, and or that you came from, and you can be part of the Canadian culture, and then just unique. You're unique, right? You don't need to be just strictly one way. You can be figure out who you are.
Exactly. And it boils down to some of my personal philosophies of being authentic and integrous, because those are
Mhm.
two most important things. And if you're able to become authentic and be integrous, you live by your word. And that's where, as I mentioned, is that there's no divide. It's all in one now, right? And
Yeah.
that's what we're focusing on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. So I've got a couple more questions, and
Sure, go for
thank you so much. I know you've been doing a lot of the talking, but
it.
that's why you're here. You're the expert. And so, I'm asking you and interviewing you. So,
Thank
what
you.
are some of the simple steps that we can take in order to prevent mental illness? And I know this kind of is a loaded question, but
It
if you
is,
can just,
yeah.
and I feel like you covered some of this in your presentation, but if you can just maybe elaborate a bit more on that for us.
Yeah. So, how do we prevent mental illness? Now, it's it's tough to prevent mental illness, and the reason being is because it's going back to that chart I threw up. You put mental illness, but you have those other areas, are they biological, psychological, etc.,
Biopsychosocial, yeah.
right? Social, right? That
Mhm.
ties into it. One of the things we can do is, for instance, I'm going back to my phone, is social media, right? Being able to disconnect. That's really important, because what I find is that um, we're influenced from what we see. And so if we have the ability to limit our exposure out there, and not saying all social media is bad, none of that. And it's just that limit our exposure to things that we don't want to see. It definitely drastically improve our mental health. Other ways to prevent is being able to really have a candid conversation with yourself, if you have the ability to say, you know what, I feel uncomfortable doing this, or I'm not really liking the situation. So taking a step back and understanding that, okay, this is something that's going to impact me. It may impact others around you as well. So having that candid conversation with yourself. um, I'd also have to say, being able to do activities that bring happiness and joy. So some of those things could be, for instance, exercising, sketching, meditation, we playing with friends, right? Doing things like that, or even making dinner with your friends or family, doing things that bring joy and happiness is really important. Um, and also other ways to kind of prevent is seeking out help, right? When you recognize something is not going right and you realize some of your behaviors or mood are affecting some of your loved ones, um, have the ability to seek out help, or reaching out to with a friend to have that kind of conversation is, I'm not feeling well, this is what I'm going through, I need help. And that's okay, because the more you do that, the stronger you become. So that's some of the ways of kind of preventing mental illness, is finding those great activities, limiting our intake of news or some certain type of media that we find unhealthy for ourselves, and just being able to have those candid conversations, not just with ourselves, but with our peers as well, and just taking a stand for what we believe in.
Great, thank you. And I think, going back to when you talked about like children, youth, and it's also if things are happening at school, you're being bullied or something like that, being able
Right.
to open up and tell your parents and talking to the teacher. And so that way you know that you're not alone and that people are listening to you. So thank you for that. I do
Exactly.
have
Yeah.
my last question.
Go for
So do
it.
you feel that South Asian men are getting the message in terms of about mental illness and coming out to talk openly about their mental health problems, or are they not ready to talk?
That's a great question.
Mm.
South Asian men, I believe that we are working towards that cusp of that tipping point to have the ability to have that candid conversation, have the ability to speak up. Now, foundations such as Soch, or foundations such as Voice of Men, for instance, right? We are getting there, right? And it doesn't have to be for South Asians, for men in general. Is that
Mhm.
the resources are getting out there, the names are getting out there. It just, the channels of communication, there's still that lack of barrier, because if you think about it, speaking from out west, for instance, I can only speak about west because I was born here. Is that, and born and raised here rather, is that we're first generation, right? And we still have strong cultural ties to who our parents are and our roots, for instance. And so it's still, it's an uphill battle, but slowly that uphill battle is being elevated by going on a gondola, literally, right? Slow and steady wins the race. And slowly but surely, we are having those channels available, right? We're talking like on I'm in Canada right now as well, that we're talking on a Saturday morning on Zoom, and we have the ability to reach out to thousands, not even millions, for instance, right? On such platforms like this. The channels of social media, there are foundations out there. It's, it takes a simple Google search and resources out there for you to reach out for help. So long story short is that it's a tough climb, but we're getting there though. And as I mentioned, is that the barriers are being broken down, and a lot of South Asian men are coming forward because they begin to recognize that this is not right what they're doing. And surprisingly, in some of our discussions that we have for our workshops, is that we find men who are in their early 40s, late 30s, that have kids, are coming out saying, "Guys, I got this problem. That's what we're talking about." And we have a huge spectrum from South Asian males that are in their 20s, early 20s, to like their late 40s. Sorry, to mid to late 40s as well, join the conversation. So um, yeah. So for the person who asked the question, we're almost there, but it's just, it's tough. So we're slowly climbing that hill. Yeah.
So slowly but surely, and I think it's great that, like you mentioned, organizations like Soch, Voice of Men 360, other organizations that are culturally competent, that are trying to, work with people that are struggling with mental health and letting them know that there's no judgment here. We're here for you. We want to understand where you're coming from. A lot of us understand and have some of the similar cultural upbringings, and
Right.
we are just open to working with you. And so it's really great to have you on here today to talk
Thank
about
you.
what you guys provide. And thank you for partnering with us and talking with us and sharing this message, with
Thank you.
us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you to Shivam, yourself too, and the audience. Thank you for joining us today with this partnerships. I think workshops such as this, webinars such as this are the ones that are breaking down the barrier. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, that's very important. Thank you so much, Jeff. So I'm just going to wrap up our show today. So just wanting to everybody to know, weekly we do have this webinar that I mentioned, and we also have 4 other live shows. We have Open Up, where people can come and share their personal journey, and that's a live talk show that is every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also have Vili, which is a Tamil live talk show, and it means I believe in Tamil, and that's Wednesdays at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, as well as Sundays 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for people who live outside of Canada. And then we do have a panel discussion that happens once a month in English and Tamil as well. And then there are some podcasts that you can check out. So there's Vili as well, and then on Open Up in English. So those ones you can just check out at your own convenience. And we recently started our Monthly's Men group. We started it in January, and it was very successful. And we have another one coming up tomorrow night, actually. And so it's every third Sunday of every month. So from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And this week tomorrow we will be actually having a guest speaker that is that has a suicide survival story. And so it's important, just like Jazz talked about mental illness, it's important to talk about your journey, where you're coming from and how you've overcome, and then to share your story so you can help out other people to overcome as well. So that will be tomorrow. Please go on our Facebook page to find the links to register, and we hope to see you there. And then next week, Saturday, we will be having a panel discussion on labor issues faced by men in workplaces. And so that I believe it's going to be from 10 to 12, Sivan? Yes, so that will be from 10 to 12 next week, Saturday. And so this will be about how they can get help. And then we will have speakers from different industries and from different positions. So please join us as well. And so we would like to work with individuals, Voice of Men 360 would like to work with individuals, professionals, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, government officials, and businesses. We're trying to reach men from all ages, all cultures. We just want to have healthy men in our society. It's time, enough is enough. Like Jazz said, let's open up. Let's talk about what's bothering us. Let's be healthy. Let's take on this new alpha male, this that is in tune with their emotions, their spiritual side, and just physically fit and mentally well. So let's partner together. Come and partner with us, Voice of Men 360. We can be reached by phone at 437-889-8329. And then that's 437-889-8329. Our email address is info@voiceofmen360.org. And our website is www.voiceofmen360.org. And you can also find us on social media. So we're on Facebook, Voice of Men 360. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Twitter. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. So, you can't really, you can't hide from us. Like, we are there. You can find us. There's no excuses, okay? No excuses. We are out there. We want to be, of help to everybody, every man, and even women. There's things that women can learn from this, how to work better with your man, your son. Like I said, last week in a platform I was on, I'm on this because I have a young son and I have a husband. So I want to, my husband, he's actually been on the Open Up talk show, and he's talked about what it was like growing up as a man and some of the things as a boy and into a man, some of the things he struggled with. He didn't have a father, and so trying to raise my son as not having a father figure. And so the things that we're learning together on how to, because he does listen to these things and he watches. And so, it's very important, as much as I'm a social worker and I have the skills and I have the knowledge, until you hear what other people are going through, until you know what men are struggling with, what boys are struggling with, you will never know. You can never know enough. The education can never be enough. So hearing live stories and hearing people's real talk and real life experiences, I believe adds to my knowledge base. And I'm just always seeking to gain more knowledge on how to be of help to boys and men. And I find this is also useful in my practice as well. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, Voice of Men 360. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. Thank you, Jazz from Soch, for spending time with us. Thank you so much. I believe what you have shared with us has been impactful, and I do hope that it will cause men from South Asia and from other cultures, other parts of the world, to want to do more and to want to live a healthier life and to be the best that they can be. Thank you. And we will see everybody next week, okay?